Hey, what's going on, everybody, and welcome back to my channel, Movie Files. Elliot back again with a brand new movie review, and today we are discussing the 8th film in the Conjuring universe, and that is The Conjuring 3, also known as The Conjuring The Devil Made Me Do It. I'm really excited to let you all know my thoughts on the film and let you know if I think it's worth checking out all in this spoiler-free review. But before we break it down, make sure you're following me on all my other social media accounts. If you all are new to the channel, welcome to the community. Consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. That way you all can get the alert from when I drop new content. It would mean a lot to me if you all can like and share this review. It helps out the channel a lot, but I also appreciate all the support. And in those comments, let me know if The Conjuring The Devil Made Me Do It was a film you were looking forward to checking out, and how did you see it for the first time? Was it at home on HBO Max or was it in theaters? But more importantly, let's talk about the film. Your pros, your cons, your thoughts on the direction by Michael Chaves, the performances. Did you enjoy this story? And we're talking about the 8th film in this franchise. Let's talk rankings, ladies and gentlemen. Is this your number 1 Conjuring film in the franchise? Is it number 8? Share with me. If you've seen all 8 films, let me know your list in the comments below. So for me, I am a Conjuring fan. 2013's Conjuring is one of my favorite films of the last decade. One of my top 15 horror films of all time. A really great sequel. The spin-offs, they have their moments, right? The Nun has its moments. La Llorona has its moments. You know, all the Annabelle films have their moments, but they're not as up to par as the Conjuring movies, right? But I'm still a fan. I've seen all of the movies in theaters. That's actually a lie. The devil made me lie there, guys. No, the only film I didn't see in theaters was Annabelle Creation, and now this. I watched this film at home in the comfort of my own home, and we'll talk about my experience of watching at home. But nonetheless, I'm a fan of the franchise, but I'm not going to lie. I was nervous about The Conjuring 3, and it's one reason I was nervous, and that is James Wan is attached to the film, but not as a director, but as the writer. He has credits to the story. You have Michael Chaves, the director of La Llorona, which I talked about in my review a couple years ago. I didn't enjoy the story too much, but there's something to be said about his direction, which we'll talk about in this review. But I was nervous that James Wan wasn't behind the camera. But let's talk about my positives first. How did the film work out for me? Well, let's start with Michael Chaves. Now, as I said in my review on La Llorona, I think he's a very capable director. I think he does a good job of setting the atmosphere, setting the tone, the mood, and capturing some good scares. And I gotta say, I think that he carries that over to this film. Now, there is a gaping hole of James Wan missing in this film, but I think James did a good job of allowing Michael Chaves to bring in his sensibilities. Now, there are moments where they try to bring in some James Wan sweeping shots, and I think Michael Chaves gets the tone. He knows these characters, Ed and Lorraine, and he captures their love story really well, which we'll talk about in a second. But I think I was nervous that he was going to be the flaw of the film, but I'm happy to say, for me at least, that he wasn't the flaw of the movie as far as his direction goes. And we'll talk about some of the other stuff a little bit later, but I think Michael Chaves did a good job, and I think James Wan saw something in him, and I think he made a good choice in allowing him to tell this story of Ed and Lorraine. So speaking of Ed and Lorraine, the stars of this franchise, Patrick Wilson, Vera Farmiga as Ed and Lorraine, they are fantastic. They are easily the best part of this film. There is a love story in this movie, which has been there for most of the other films, and you know, you see that love in Annabelle Comes Home, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is the most screen time that we've gotten with Ed and Lorraine in the entire franchise, and I love that because I love these characters. It's just like this chemistry that Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga have, which, let me just break down their performances individually. Speaking of Patrick Wilson, I'm a big fan of his work. I love that he works with James Wan a lot, especially in this franchise and Insidious, and I'm really intrigued to see him being director. He's going to be directing the next Insidious film, but that's neither here nor there. Patrick Wilson as Ed Warren does such a great job. He cares for these people that he's helping. He loves his family, and he goes through some stuff in this film, man. Ed has a moment happen to him very early on that kind of makes his abilities limited in this film, but you still see that courage. You still see him battling his own demons, battling the demon in this film, and I really enjoyed the performance. This may be my favorite performance by both Ed and Lorraine in the entire franchise. And that says a lot because I love what they did in the first one. I love them in the second one. I love their cameo in Annabelle Comes Home. But this is probably my favorite performance by these two actors, which, speaking of his counterpart, Vera Farmiga, who also I'm a big fan of her work and love what she does in this genre and just love her in general, She's great, man. Lorraine is doing a lot in this movie, guys. Like, she's, she has her psychic abilities that she uses quite a few times in this story. She has this a really interesting parallel love story, which one I didn't really care for. But again, speaking back to the love story of Ed and Lorraine, we get some backstory. We learn a little bit about how they met each other. We really see how much they care for each other and what they're willing to do to share their love with other families and help these families escape these demonic presences. So I really enjoyed Vera Farmiga. I thought she was fantastic as Lorraine. And Ed, I think this is their best performance for me. I love what they brought to this film. They're the heart, they're the soul, they carry all the emotional weight. Whenever they went on screen, you felt their presence. You missed their presence from me. And again, when they were on screen, it's the chemistry, it's the charisma, it's the caring for these characters that really carry this film for me personally, which I do want to highlight some moments in the movie without breaking it down too in detail, because again, no spoilers. But going back to Michael Chaves' direction, the opening sequence is fantastic. It's one of my favorite in the franchise. I'm not going to lie. There's a particular exorcism that happens, and there's some body contortions that were pretty awesome and really well captured. I thought the opening was really great and really kind of sets the tone. Unfortunately, there are some moments that don't really live up to the expectations of the opening. There is a morgue scene that I thought was really well executed. I thought that the atmosphere and the tone and the person involved, the people involved in that scene, in particular, a particular person, was fantastic. And then there's some other moments, man, especially in the third act of the film, which I really enjoyed the third act. I thought the second act, which we'll talk about here, was a little bit disappointing, but that third act really kind of hits home, especially in the scare department. There's a really well captured shot that takes place in the tunnels. There's a particular adversary that I was not expecting in this film that I really kind of enjoyed her presence. But also, going back to body contortion and exorcisms, there's a really big scene in the third act that I thought was really well captured. So again, it speaks to Michael Chaves capturing those moments for me personally. And again, the heart and the soul of the story is love and perseverance and fighting through these demonic entities with love and caring for one another. And I thought that the love story was really strong, more so for Ed and Lorraine. But I had a moment with a particular character by the name of Arnie and his girlfriend that I thought was, by the third act, I was like, okay, I feel their love now for the first time in the entire film. So those are some moments that really kind of stood out to me, but I want to talk about my criticisms. Now, I remember after The Conjuring 2 that the next film was supposed to be about a werewolf, and they even hinted that in Annabelle Comes Home, that this whole demonic presence within a werewolf. I really want to see that film. Unfortunately, we know this one is about the most sensational court case revolving around the first time in American history a person is pleading not guilty because they were possessed by the devil. Now, for me, my criticisms lie within that pitch. I didn't find this to be sensational. Now, I wasn't expecting this courtroom drama by any means, but literally when it comes to this case and being sensational and this newscasting and everyone hearing about it, I didn't feel it. And if I'm being honest, I didn't care for the story, guys. I love werewolves. I would have loved to have seen a werewolf presence in the Conjuring universe, but this story was just not interesting to me at all, and it really kind of plays into Arnie. And I believe the actor's name is Ruairi O'Connor, who plays Arnie. He has moments that I care for him, but for the most part, what I love about the first Conjuring and what I love about the second Conjuring, I love Ed and Lorraine, and they're my favorite parts, but I cared for the families that they were helping. I didn't care for the family, guys. We barely spend time with the main kid, and when something happens and Arnie comes across a certain presence, I just didn't feel the emotional connection like I did for those other two families and other two films. And I think it plays a little bit to the performance. It didn't feel believable. They didn't have the charm and the charisma, and I just didn't really care for those characters, if I'm being honest. Again, whenever Ed and Lorraine were on screen, the film was at its best, but whenever we strayed away from that and focus on Arnie and the kid and his girlfriend and Bruno and all that stuff, I'm just like, the execution isn't that well put to me. And I'm go back to, I applaud how they take this blockbuster approach to the horror scares, but it's too Hollywood. This film in particularly, the setup, it gave away too much for me personally. You know, I think of how they set up the scares. It was very obvious in regards to this approach. And just to be frank, it took away from the scares for me. This film wasn't that scary. It's the least scariest Conjuring film. And again, scary horror films are very subjective. But the scariest part of this movie for me, besides that morgue scene, which I thought was executed really well, I wasn't necessarily scared. I was just really more thrilled. The scariest part of this movie for me is the end credit scene. And I won't tell you why that is the case, but the film just kind of lacked that personality, that flair. And again, when it came to the actual jump scares, which again, jump scares can be effective if done right, it was just too telegraphed. They would literally set up the scenes. You could it's almost like an action movie where they set up an action sequence and you can feel, okay, this is about to, where the action's going to happen. The same thing applies to this film where it's a matter of the lighting, the audio. Again, I watched it at home, I watched it in my dark, I had the lights off and all that stuff, but it just felt so telegraphed that, okay, there's a scare that's going to happen, versus the way James Wan, again, Michael Chaves isn't James Wan, but it's just the way that James Wan creates the tension, creates the atmosphere. You don't really see a lot of things coming, but in this film, it was right around the corner. And again, I think the story is at fault in this film. It's one of the least interesting stories to me because, again, it didn't really play into the whole sensational courtroom trial. And when you get to the conclusion of the courtroom scenes, it didn't really work out too well for me. It felt kind of off, which, again, just speaking of off, this film tries to inject a good amount of comedy that fell absolutely flat. There are some moments in this film, just like they could have cut that out. Again, it's nice to have some levity, and we've gotten levity in other films in this movie, in this franchise in particular, but this film, the comedy, oh my goodness, I don't know who wrote, James Wan was the writer of the story, but he's not the screenwriter, but some of the jokes to me really didn't land. That's more of a minor thing. The biggest thing to me was I wasn't all that interested in the case. I wasn't really all that interested in the characters that weren't by the name of Ed and Lorraine, so those are my criticisms. But before I give you all my overall score, make sure to like the video, share the video, leave your thoughts in the comments, your pros, your cons, and let me know your rankings of all 8 films in this franchise. With all that being said, even though I have my criticisms, The Conjuring 3, The Devil Made Me Do It, still has heart, and it's all due to the fact that we have Ed and Lorraine's story being at the forefront, and they are the saving grace of this film. Now, I will apply those scenes I mentioned earlier. I think Michael Chaves does a good job of those 4 or 5 scenes that I pointed out earlier in this review. But again, unfortunately, the story's lacking. It's a bit boring at times. It's not all that scary. And listen, I think this is the end of a chapter for the Warrens, but there is a potentiality of, hey, if they can give me that werewolf story, I might be back on board. But I'm okay with this being the last Conjuring film. We know it's not going to be, but with all that being said, I'm going to give this film, The Conjuring 3, or The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, a solid 3 out of 5. Now, I gave The Conjuring 2 a 3.8 out of 5. I gave the first one a 4.5 out of 5. It's been so long since I ranked that film. So out of the 3 main stories, this is my least favorite one. I would say 1, 2, and 3. And then in the grand scheme of the 8 franchise, or the 8 films, this is probably my 4th favorite one. I have the Annabelle 3 pretty high up, so I'll say this is my 4th favorite film in the entire franchise. But let me know your rankings. Let me know your thoughts in the comments of this film. What worked for you? What didn't work for you? Were you scared? Did you see it on HBO Max or in the theaters? Let's talk about it all in the comments below. As always, make sure to like, share, comment, subscribe. Hit the bell. That way you don't miss any of my other content. Hope you all enjoyed this review. Hope you're staying safe, and we'll see you on the next video.